It's December 29th, 1972. Eastern Airlines Flight 401 departs from New York, bound for Miami. On board, a brand new Lockheed L-1011 TriStar. It's one of the most advanced jets of its time. The crew is experienced, the weather is clear, the flight's smooth. For most of the journey, everything feels routine, till the very end. As the plane approaches Miami, the crew lowers the landing gear. 2 green lights appear, but the third one doesn't. The nose gear light stays dark. Did the nose gear fail, or is the bulb burned out? Captain Robert Loft decides to investigate. First Officer Albert Stockstill and Flight Engineer Don Repo join in. The autopilot is set to circle Miami while they troubleshoot. The crew removes the light assembly to check the bulb. They hand it around, twist it, examine it. All the while, the plane slowly loses altitude. Distracted by the faulty light, no one notices. The autopilot had disengaged when the control column was nudged. The plane drifts lower and lower over the Florida Everglades. At 11:42 p.m., Flight 401 slams into the swamp. The TriStar shatters into pieces across the wetlands. Rescue crews rush into the dark, muddy water. Miraculously, 75 people survive. But 101 lose their lives, including Captain Loft and Flight Engineer Repo. It's the first major crash of the new L-1011. The investigation later rules it pilot error. It's distraction over a burnt-out bulb. But the story doesn't end there. Because Flight 401 is about to become more than a tragedy. Salvage crews recover usable parts from the wreck. Eastern Airlines, facing tight budgets, installs them into other TriStar jets. At first, it's simple recycling, cost-saving, practical. But then, strange reports start coming in. Passengers and crew begin seeing something unusual, or rather, someone. In one plane, a flight attendant notices a man in a captain's uniform sitting quietly in first class. When she goes to speak to him, he vanishes. Another crew reports seeing a familiar face reflected in the cockpit glass. It's Captain Loft. Dead for months, yet calmly watching over the crew. Flight engineers start reporting encounters too. In one case, a mechanic sees Don Repo inspecting equipment in the avionics bay. Repo warns him about a fault, and the warning proves correct. The airline tries to downplay the stories, but they spread quickly through hangars, crew rooms, and terminals. Pilots whisper about phantoms at altitude. Flight attendants swap eerie tales over layovers. Even passengers begin writing letters to Eastern Airlines. All of them say the same thing. Flight 401 isn't finished. Captain Loft and Don Repo are still flying. They're showing up on planes with parts salvaged from the crash. Eastern management grows nervous. They don't want talk of ghosts scaring passengers. Officially, they deny everything. But behind the scenes, memos circulate. The sightings line up with planes known to have reused Flight 401 components. And always, the ghosts seem protective, not malicious. They appear to warn crews about potential dangers. They vanish once the danger is avoided. One story tells of Repo appearing in a galley oven door. He says, "Watch out for fire." Weeks later, that exact plane suffers an electrical fire. The crew, prepared, prevents disaster. Another tale has Loft appearing in the cockpit before takeoff, tells the first officer. "You've got a problem with number 3 engine." Mechanics check and find exactly that. Skeptics laugh. They call it stress, fatigue, imagination. But the stories keep piling up. They're coming from professionals, pilots, mechanics, attendants. Not the type of people known for superstition. Soon, Flight 401 becomes the most famous ghost story in aviation history. Journalists get wind of it. Books are written. TV specials air. Even Hollywood makes a movie about it. For a while, passengers ask if they're flying on the haunted planes. Eastern Airlines eventually removes all parts traced back to Flight 401. And after that, the sightings fade away. But the legend never dies. Today, aviation buffs still talk about Loft and Repo, not as vengeful spirits, but as guardians of the sky. Their presence became part of airline folklore, and the Everglades crash site itself. People say it carries a silence that feels heavier than air. Fishermen report strange lights over the swamp at night, as if something from 1972 is still unfinished. The official investigation closed long ago. But unofficially, Flight 401 is still flying. The wreckage became legend. The ghosts became crew. And the story became impossible to ground. Who saw them, where, and what they said. And how Eastern Airlines scrambled to keep the story quiet. Because when ghosts start showing up at 30,000 feet, even airlines start sweating. Passengers start asking uncomfortable questions. But you'll want to hear the answers, so buckle in. The haunting of Flight 401 is about to climb higher. Let's talk sightings. Because this is where the story goes from tragic to downright spooky. The first reports come only months after the crash. Flight attendant serving meals in first class sees a passenger in uniform. She thinks he's the captain, maybe hitching a ride. She goes back to check the manifest. No captain listed. When she returns to the seat, it's empty. Another report comes from a different L1011. The crew is preparing for takeoff. In the cockpit window reflection, the first officer sees another face behind him. He spins around. No one there. Later, he realizes the reflection looked exactly like Captain Loft. In another case, a flight engineer working pre-flight checks opens the avionics bay. A man is crouched inside, looking at the wiring. The engineer asks, "Who are you?" The man looks up. It's Don Repo. He says calmly, "Don't worry about the test. Everything will be fine." Then he disappears. The engineer is shaken, but reports it anyway. And here's the kicker. That plane later has a serious systems test malfunction, but no damage occurs. Crew members begin to whisper that Repo is watching over the planes. Another story comes from a flight attendant checking the galley ovens. She looks at the glass door of one unit. Face stares back at her. "It's Repo again." His voice clear as day says, "Watch out for fire." Weeks later, the same aircraft suffers an electrical fire in the galley. The crew is ready, thanks to Repo's warning. They extinguish it quickly. Passengers never know how close they came to disaster. Then there's the most famous sighting of all. A full flight crew, multiple witnesses, preparing for takeoff. Captain Loft appears in uniform, standing in the galley. He speaks directly to the crew. "You don't need to worry. We will not let it happen again." Everyone freezes. Seconds later, he vanishes. This report rattles Eastern management. It's one thing when one person sees a ghost. It's another when several professionals claim the same thing. But Eastern has a reputation to protect. Can't have passengers fearing haunted planes, so they clamp down. Internal memos circulate warning staff not to spread superstitious rumors. Mechanics are told to keep ghost reports off official paperwork. Ow! But of course, word leaks anyway. Soon, journalists are calling Eastern for comment. Passengers begin asking nervous questions at ticket counters. "Am I flying on one of those planes with Flight 401 parts?" Eastern flatly denies everything. But former employees later confirmed the sightings were real, at least to those who saw them. And the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Every major sighting happens on L-1011s, fitted with salvaged parts from Flight 401. Remove the parts, the ghosts disappear. Keep the parts. Loft and Repo show up. Coincidence, or a haunting tied to metal and wires? Some believe the ghosts lingered because their mission wasn't finished. Loft and Repo died trying to save Flight 401. Maybe they weren't ready to stop flying. Others suggest the trauma imprinted itself onto the salvaged equipment. A kind of psychic residue. Not science, but spooky enough to spread. Even skeptics admit the reports were oddly consistent. Loft appeared calm, authoritative, protective. Repo was more hands-on, warning of mechanical faults. Neither was ever described as frightening. If anything, the ghosts seemed to be doing their jobs. Watching, guiding, preventing disaster. By the late 1970s, the stories are too loud to ignore. Books hit the shelves like The Ghost of Flight 401 by John Fuller. The book becomes a bestseller. TV networks jump on the story. Documentaries dramatize the sightings with eerie reenactments. Hollywood even produces a made-for-TV movie. Millions now know the tale of Loft and Repo. Passengers start requesting seat changes if they think their plane is one of the haunted ones. Eastern Airlines, embarrassed, begins quietly removing all parts salvaged from Flight 401. After that, the sightings stop almost entirely. Did removing the parts end the haunting? Or did Eastern simply succeed in burying the story? Former employees swear the ghosts were real. Passengers who saw them never changed their minds. And even decades later, flight crews still swap the tales during layovers. The story refuses to fade, because it's not only about ghosts, it's about the question: can tragedy linger in the machines we build? Can memory cling to steel and glass? Flight 401 suggests maybe yes. And Loft and Repo, if you believe the reports, didn't come back for revenge. They came back to finish their watch. Guardians of the sky, stuck between duty and eternity. Next, we'll explore how this story spread into pop culture, how it changed airline folklore forever, and why the ghost of Flight 401 still fascinates pilots, passengers, and storytellers half a century later. Because some flights never really land. The sightings of Don Repo and Bob Loft didn't stop. They spread across different airlines, always tied to planes with reused parts. Attendants claimed to see Repo in the galley, calmly checking equipment. Pilots swore Loft warned them about engine trouble before takeoff. In many cases, the warnings saved flights. That's what makes the story so strange. It wasn't just ghostly scares. These hauntings sometimes prevented disasters. In one case, a plane avoided serious engine failure because Repo's ghost pointed it out. Witnesses said his apparition leaned over the instruments, tapping a gauge. Seconds later, the gauge failed in real life. If the crew hadn't acted, lives would have been lost. Another report told of Loft appearing in a cockpit mid-flight. He warned the pilots about a fire in the cargo hold. When they checked, the fire alarm hadn't gone off yet. But sure enough, smoke started to fill the compartment moments later. The fire was contained, and the plane landed safely. Stories like these gave the ghost a strange reputation, not of terror, but of guardianship. Loft and Repo still flying, protecting passengers even after death. That's how many flight crews saw it. Some even admitted feeling reassured when they sensed one of them nearby. But the airlines weren't as thrilled. Eastern Airlines, in particular, hated the ghost rumors. They feared passengers would panic if the story spread, so the company denied everything. Officially, Eastern said no ghosts existed on their planes. They claimed the sightings were imagination, stress, or rumor. But behind closed doors, crew members whispered different tales. Many swore the sightings were real. Some even signed sworn statements about what they saw. Flight logs recorded strange warnings that matched later mechanical issues. Yet the company destroyed these reports. They wanted the ghost story buried as fast as possible. Still, the stories leaked. Books and newspaper articles told the world about Flight 401's lingering crew. In 1974, journalist John G. Fuller published The Ghost of Flight 401. The book became a bestseller, cementing the tale in popular culture. The book included witness testimonies from over 20 credible crew members. It even described how some engineers believed the salvaged parts carried energy. Fuller suggested that Loft and Repo were tied to the physical pieces of the plane. When those parts were installed elsewhere, their spirits went along. It's a chilling but fascinating thought. Could memory and presence cling to metal? Could the wreckage of a tragedy carry its ghosts into the future? That's what made the Flight 401 case different from other hauntings. It wasn't about a haunted house or a cursed object. It was about modern aircraft technology, haunted by its own past. Over time, airlines quietly removed the reused parts. And when the salvaged pieces were retired, the ghost sightings stopped. No more Repo in the galley. No more Loft giving warnings. Silence returned to the skies. That fact alone convinced many crew members that the stories were true. Why would the hauntings stop if they were only stress-induced hallucinations? The answer to believers was clear. Repo and Loft had finished their work. They'd protected the skies as long as the pieces of their planes still flew. Once those parts were gone, their spirits could finally rest. Still, the story refuses to die. Pilots, historians, and ghost enthusiasts continue to debate it. Some call it the most documented airline haunting in history. Others dismiss it as superstition fueled by trauma. But the number of credible witnesses is hard to ignore. These weren't random passengers telling wild tales. They were trained crew, engineers, and pilots people with everything to lose by speaking up. And yet they did. They risked ridicule because they believed what they saw. Today, Flight 401's crash site is a quiet patch of Everglades. But for those who know the story, the swamp feels heavier, haunted. It's not the wreckage that lingers, it's the memory. memory of two men who refused to stop flying, and maybe for a while saved lives even in death. The Ghost of Flight 401 is a story that blends tragedy, technology, and the paranormal. It asks questions we still don't know how to answer. Can spirits attach to objects? Do heroes continue their work beyond the grave? Or are these stories our way of making sense of chaos? We may never know for sure. But the tale of Loft and Repo lives on in aviation folklore. Their ghosts became legends of the skies, a reminder that some flights never end, and some crews never stop watching over their passengers. Next time you step onto a plane, you might think of Flight 401. You might wonder about the lives that built the machines around you. You might wonder if ghosts really linger in the metal. For some, it's only superstition. For others, it's proof of loyalty that death couldn't erase. Either way, the story sticks. It's been over 50 years since Flight 401 fell, but people are still telling the tale, still asking the same questions, still imagining Loft and Repo in the aisles, still wondering if their presence once saved lives. Stories like this endure because they carry a human truth. We don't want to believe tragedy is the end. We want to believe loyalty, courage, and duty can outlast death. That's why the Ghost of Flight 401 will never be forgotten. It's more than a ghost story, it's aviation history. A reminder that legends don't always belong to castles or battlefields. Sometimes they're waiting in the skies above.
That's it for today's Forgotten Tale. If this story made you raise an eyebrow, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that dusty little bell so you never miss another echo from the past. Drop it in the comments. We're always listening for new echoes. Got a weird bit of history you think we should cover? Until next time, keep your curiosity loud and your history weird.